Not so long ago, BYD, China's leading EV maker, announced an ambitious plan to increase its share in the European EV market by an astonishing 500% in 2024. However, just like with other Chinese EV companies, things aren't going smoothly in this part of the world. The European Union is figuring out new ways to protect its own companies, and now it looks pretty clear that Chinese companies won't overtake this market so easily. Make sure to stay with us as we present to you 5 reasons why Chinese EVs have flooded Europe and now rot in warehouses unsold. Welcome to Evolution Tech, where technology meets tomorrow, leading the charge into the ever-evolving landscape of electric vehicles, EVs, and groundbreaking green technologies. Number 5. 10,000 BYD EVs in European warehouses. Over the last couple of years, BYD was the fastest-growing EV maker in the world. Things have been developing so fast that eventually, this Chinese company became the leading EV maker in the world in the fourth quarter of last year, dethroning Tesla from the top position. However, this year didn't start as expected, as its growth is slower than expected. One of the reasons why is the current slowdown in China, caused by the fact that the Chinese economy is not in the best shape these days. But that's just one part of the problem. The other one is the expansion overseas. Namely, despite the excellent sales numbers, BYD has never been able to establish a position it thinks it deserves in Europe. Last year, the brand's share in the European EV market was around 1%. For 2024, the company announced an ambitious plan to get to 5% of the total EV share on the old continent, which would mean a stunning 500% growth in just 12 months. And considering the way things are currently developing, that's probably not going to happen because the latest reports suggest that there are more than 10,000 BYD EV models stuck in warehouses across Europe, which can't be sold for a couple of reasons. First of all, there are new measures that the European Union is taking to protect its own EV makers. But we also can't neglect the fact that BYD currently has big quality issues with its products, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Number 4. Anti-subsidy investigation. With the most recent trends in the automotive industry, it's obvious that European car makers can keep up with fast-growing companies from China. According to the latest studies, Chinese EVs are about 20% more affordable than European EVs on average. Reasons are numerous, starting from significantly lower labor costs. But the bigger problem is the expansion strategy the Chinese government has been practicing for a while. Namely, the Chinese government has been giving massive subsidies to EV makers that operate in Europe. For every EV sold in the old continent, Chinese EV companies would get a notable financial injection from their government. As a result, the presence of Chinese automakers is getting bigger and bigger at a rapid pace. A few years ago, Chinese EV companies accounted for just 1% of the market. Now that number went up to 8%, while the European Car Association suggested it could go up to 15% by 2025. Besides Chinese companies, there are Western legacy car makers with their vehicles assembled in China. The trade imbalance is becoming bigger and bigger, and all this forced the European Commission to initiate a so-called anti-subsidy investigation. Number 3. Build quality issues. BYD's growth has been impressive over the last few years, so impressive that we're now talking about the third most valuable automaker in the world, right behind Tesla and Toyota. But with such a rapid production increase, it's not always easy to keep up in terms of quality control. After all, let's be honest and say that Chinese products have never been famous for their quality, so why would things be any different with electric cars? In any case, just like other Chinese automakers, BYD is also facing big quality issues, which is another big reason for the aforementioned 10,000 EVs being stuck in European warehouses. Namely, quality issues have been reported in various parts of the world. In Europe, these issues were primarily due to things like mold, which appeared on BYD EVs even before they were unloaded from transport ships. One of the reasons may be the fact that BYD now has its own car carriers, so it probably lacks experience in overseeing the entire transport process. In Japan, on the other hand, the key problems are scratches, which once again have something to do with bad transportation practices. Number 2. Trouble for Chinese-centered car makers. Once again, we can take BYD as an example. Even though this is currently the world's largest EV maker, the future may not be as bright as it seems. Despite the impressive sales numbers and growth, this company has a huge problem called over-reliance on the domestic market. 95% of its sales are in China. BYD never managed to expand abroad effectively. It sells cars in certain Asian countries and Australia, but it's nowhere near becoming a major player in Europe, where it accounts for just 1% of the total EV market. In such a set of circumstances, with over-reliance on just one market, things can easily turn upside down, and that's exactly what happened last month when a typically slow February in China was even slower than expected. It wasn't just about the Chinese New Year slowdown and lower sales numbers compared to January. We also saw a massive 31% slowdown compared to February 2023. Number 1. European car makers are ready to cut production costs. The biggest fear European car makers have when we talk about Chinese expansion is that they won't be able to compete in terms of pricing. As mentioned, Chinese EVs are significantly cheaper than European EVs at the moment. So, playing on the quality card, which is obvious on the European side, may not be enough in times of high inflation and limited financial power of EU citizens. But things could change pretty soon because legacy car makers have finally taken this battle seriously and are now working out different methods of cutting production costs. Companies like Renault and Stellantis are already pushing very hard to cut production costs with various strategies. Luca De Meo, Renault CEO, published the 2023 result and then stated that reducing production costs will be easier with smaller cars because that gives the opportunity to cut the size of the battery. To remind you, the battery typically makes up around 40% of an EV's cost. On the other hand, Carlos Tavares, Stellantis CEO, pointed out that the prices of rare earth elements and other raw materials have dropped significantly, and it'll most likely continue in the same way, which will inevitably lead to further production cost lowering. Ford, on the other hand, may not be a European car maker, but its presence in this market spans decades, with plants as well as design and research centers in several locations across the old continent. According to CEO Jim Farley, the Blue Oval Company has already started a team to make lower-cost EVs that can compete with Chinese automakers. He also stated that maybe Ford should do this with another OEM, suggesting that joining forces is also one of the ways to compete with companies like BYD and lower production costs. Other European car makers are also working on their cost reduction strategies, and with the recent actions taken by EU authorities, it looks like Chinese companies will hardly find their way to this market, and that domestic legacy car makers will eventually prevail. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.